Thanks for accepting this interview.
Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. For the first question, I would like to ask you about your background in art as an artist. I mean, how you find that you want to be an artist? How this artistic life start in your career?
Okay, great. Well, it's something I did all my life. I basically drew ever since I remember, but mostly the formal years. I was studying I was studying music actually in Kargay Musiqi in Iran for years, for like 7-8 years. In my teen years, I kind of switched from music to taking art more seriously. I took some classes in Iran with Namia Petgar for many years, and went to design atelier for a few years, and basically, tried my hand at drawing and painting. And then basically dreamed about being an artist, even though I didn't really know any other artists around me except for these settings and classes. I didn't really know anybody who was doing it professionally, but it was sort of a dream.
Yeah, sure. You came to the United States to study fine art in 1978, if I'm right. And how did your experience during this challenging time shape your career as an artist?
It's an interesting question. So when I came here to study in 1978, it was basically for getting the opportunity to study abroad and gaining that experience. But the whole plan was that I would study art and then go back to Iran after a few years. And so little did we know that life had a different plan. 6 months after I came, the Iranian politics started shifting and changing, and it became obvious that a big change was about to happen. And of course, that was something that growing up in Iran, we all anticipated. And yet I was far away, and the advice was not to return back to Iran because the universities were closed, and we kept waiting for the political situation to change. So a few years, hostage crisis, and then the war started, and it was basically a distance between me and my siblings here and my parents who were back in Iran, and not really being able to visit them. And so a lot of longing and a lot of really, like I said, waiting to see what happens, and experiencing all of those changes from a distance. So in one way, it was my life was changing, but on the other hand, I didn't really have any control over it, and I had very little understanding of what was actually happening. The news was rare. We hardly, for many years, especially during the war, we would hardly get any news from Iran. I mean, so a lot of worrying and anticipation of the wars because family was in Iran and so on. So definitely those years had great impact on me as a person, as well as my work eventually.
If we go back to your artworks, what are the most important issues in your work? How you describe your works and important factors in your works, in your artworks?
I mean, I can talk about my work from many different directions. I'm most excited when I have the opportunity to have a dialogue with the audience in a direct way. And by direct, I mean sometimes even through participation in my projects, at times creating projects that it's only complete with the audience. Another aspect of it that sort of comes into it also is that I bring communities together.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my work has to do with that gathering people in one place for conversation and dialogue. And the more volatile the politics have become between, especially the relationship between Iran and US, the more this has become important and has kind of taken center in my work. A lot of I go back and forth between studio work and this type of collective works where I invite a number of artists to enter into the creative exchange with projects that a lot of times are at its center is Iranian history. Mm-hmm. So Iranian history has become kind of the subject matter that I've been working with for the past few years, done a number of research and installation publications, objects and so on, sort of draw from that history and maybe even more specifically from history of descent in Iran.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And with a variety of media, right? Because I see that you work with video art, public art, installation. So how do you choose your media and surfaces? Is there a particular aesthetic involved with when you look for the material?
It's always a challenge for me. Coming from a painting background and sort of moving into sculpture, mm-hmm. I've always considered myself an object maker on some level as well. So that aspect of like studio work and making things with my hands is very important to me. And I like the material to kind of evoke the concepts, mm-hmm. Or have it embedded as part of the materiality of the work itself. Mm-hmm. The experience that the audience has with the work is very important for me. A lot of times, if it's an issue, I want to give you an example. If it's an issue that I feel like is difficult for my audiences to relate to, I find myself using extremely seductive materials to sort of draw them closer. And all of that kind of goes into the work. Mm-hmm. I've, for instance, used like collaged alphabets in my works, but it was with a conscious decision of the fact that being very aware that my audience cannot read these doesn't speak the same language, and we have that barrier. Mm-hmm. So the perception of a word would appear to a non-Iranian audience, but that is exactly was at the core of my piece anyway.
I wanted to ask you about your collage and the way you use archival photographs as a storytelling technique. I see this kind of archival form in most of your artworks, and also the way of revisiting the recent past. How did you arrive at using the archive in this way?
I began using photographs immediately following my father's passing when I took a trip back to Iran and brought back with me a few photographs. So for a few years that followed my father's passing, I was working with photographs and painting and created a whole body of work around the family photographs, basically. And immediately after that, I became very interested in the kind of stories that photographs have embedded inside of them, not beyond the whole family and the relational. And I invited the community of Iranians in the Bay Area. I became very interested in finding and gathering more stories about the community that was immediately now my community. In 2000, I became an American citizen and kind of made a decision. My family was here already, and so I made a decision that I was going to be staying here, not going back to Iran. And so that became really important to find out what stories people had to share with each other, but also with the community. And it sort of started. The collaging started with those photographs specifically, but then the project expanded, and I kind of became the place where every members of the community would actually bring materials to me to scan, and really the need for an archive is great outside of the country, and so for a while that seemed to be my task, was to gather the materials, and it went beyond to books and publications and community archives of the past 30-40 years of San Francisco Bay Area, Berkeley, Northern California. And most of the material I gathered are in the form, I scanned most of it, so I have it in digital form, but the projects continued, the archival projects continued, and I continued to organize the materials that came through my hands, and they've ended up at the Library of Congress for the most part.
Is there anything you can say about formatting content in terms of the narrative of the history and memory in your projects?
Sure. I want to talk, different projects, because I do use material medium differently. The form meets content in different various ways. Hall of Reflections, the project with the photographs, for instance, the idea of reflections became at the center of the piece. And so it was reflections in the past, gathering stories and memories of the Iranian immigrants here. And so that reflection lent itself to using mirrors for not only reflecting on the past, but also reflecting the current environments where surrounded the objects themselves. And so it was the juxtaposition of here and there, past and present, that the work itself was evoking and communicating. Even if you couldn't relate to the photographs and they seemed foreign to you, again, with the idea of the audience being other than Iranians, you would see yourself inside the mirror and in effect really create a relationship between these two entities, the audience and the photographs and the community.
Could you tell us more about your experience in collective projects? Because I see in your website that you have done a lot of collective projects with different people. So could you tell us more about it?
And that has become really central in my work, to create a space of dialogue and conversation. And a lot of times that invites a larger group, whether it's participation by audiences to bring materials, stories, wishes. I mean, I've done a lot of projects where people are invited to lend their memories, ideas, concepts. But also, most dear to my heart has been the projects where I invite other creative thinkers, artists, performers, writers, scholars, to come together for conversations around particular subjects. History being at the center of my thought and sort of at the core of my passion these days, to not just to be visiting the past, but also learning from it for steps to come with a better understanding.
Let's shift our questions to your different activities, like curating. I see that you have done a lot of curatorial projects. How do you see curating, and do you have a kind of methodology in organizing exhibitions and curate the exhibitions? What is your experience in curating and curatorial practice?
For me, the curatorial practice has always been part of my artistic practice. It's one and the same. I have been very fortunate to work with, collaboratively work with a number of curators to bring different voices, and specifically voices from the Middle East as well as other Iranian artists, to the Bay Area. I've worked with various organizations, always collaboratively. Southern Exposure, a local nonprofit organization here, was really instrumental in bringing a number of curatorial practices together. I was under collaborative curatorial committee, and so we had the opportunity to create a number of exhibitions during the 3 years that I was involved with them.
How you see the effects of art space on your projects as a curator or artist? For example, when you had an exhibition in Tehran in Ag Galerie, how was this different context, and its effects on your project? How do you see this context, and this changing in your project?
Well, I respond to the site with my installations, and so the setting becomes really important. I often am creating the work based on who the audience is as well as what the actual site looks like. And the process became really amazing. The object making aspect of it was fascinating because it was revisiting a project that was that had kind of captured time as a capsule, the immediate time after 9/11 in 2001, where I had gathered the photographs and stories of like Iranian community in Hall of Reflections. But also, I revisited it by re-photographing some of those objects that were created for that project and reproduced that in Iran. And so these are the memories of Iranians that no longer find themselves in Iran, back at a place that they grew up. And most of their memories were captured in these objects that were now produced in Iran and sort of shared with audiences in Iran. So that became really meaningful for most of the people that were involved and can't go back or haven't been back themselves, that the photographic memories were making that connection with audiences. But also, it was shown in an installation in the gallery. Very, the gallery itself is like blocks away from where I grew up. A house that doesn't exist anymore, and it was in the yard. The gallery actually, you had to enter the back. The entrance is through the yard and then into this darkened space. So, in a way, by the time you would lift the velvet curtain, you were transported into a different space. The light was dimmed, and the photographs that we had recaptured now were sort of embedded in a pile of bricks that was coming from the neighborhood houses that continuously go through transformation from, every 10 years. It seems like city of Tehran changes completely. And so it was really a reflection on my migration experience personally, but also the experience of the people who had participated in the project. What was really amazing for me was because I was talking about these projects in Farsi, I became really aware of how language had affected all of the perception and kind of the ideas of the project. So Khane Kharab, which in Persian just sort of describes my project directly, wasn't really something that I don't even think was conscious in my mind till I started talking about it in Persian. So, those kind of experiences just added layers to the work for me personally that I wasn't even aware of.
Nice. Thank you so much for this interview.